Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the State of the Bird for the fourth quarter of 2022. This one's subtitled Alpha on the Horizon. So let's get started right away, jump right into it. What is the State of the Bird? It is a presentation to explain what's going on in the project, and it's an interactive event for the community. What do I mean by interactive? It means that if you have any questions about what we've been doing with the project, anything about the presentation, stuff like that, you can at any time during this presentation type !ask in the chat with your question after it. And after I get through the main presentation, I will go through and answer all of those questions. So please make use of that, because now is a great time to do it, because everyone can reflect and we can go through it, go that way. So, all right, next up, retrospective. This is what did we do in this past quarter. So the last Day of the Bird was October 20th. It's normal, and our next one's tentatively scheduled for April 20th, 2023. We typically aim for the third Thursday after the end of the quarter. That gives us time to get everything set up and blah blah blah, right? And works real well after the holidays to get a little extra time. Yeah. So, all right. Anyways, next up is metrics, and we're going to start with contributions. Those of you that have been here for a lot of these may recall that this used to be a table. All the metrics used to be tables. Now they're graphs. And instead of just showing the previous 2 quarters, we're now showing the previous 6, which is gives you a little bit more idea of what's going on and everything. As you can see, we're kind of sitting around our normal 4 contributors. Sometimes we jump up a little bit higher, stuff like that. Q3 of 2021 was Summer of Code. That's why we were up to 10. I'm not sure what happened in Q2 2022. Just we had more contributors, right? The funny part is, even though we had 4 contributors, both Q4 and Q3, one of the 4 swapped out. It was a different person for each quarter. Whatever, it happens. So, all right, next up, review requests. So these are how many review requests are what we call pull requests. Like everybody's familiar with GitHub, or where if you're using GitLab, it's a merge request. With review board, it's called a review request, right? It's all the same thing. It's a request to get your code reviewed and get it merged, right? As you can see, Q4 here, we opened 283 review requests and we closed 282. There's one I keep forgetting to review, which is on me, which I think has been open about a month, stuff like that. But other things, there's some stuff that's just been sitting around for a while that hasn't gotten taken care of because it's not, it's a low priority. That's what I'm looking for. The reason Q3 is so much higher than everything else, if you weren't here for the last Day of the Bird, you wouldn't have heard that. So in Q3 we merged the GTK4 branch, and Pidgin 3 became a GTK4 application. As we got closer and closer to that, there was lots and lots of review requests because there's a lot of momentum behind it, a lot of excitement, and there's also a lot of bugs and weird things we had to fix after we finally got it compiling all the way and running, right? So yeah, that's what we've done review request wise. Next up are issues. So these are how many issues we've opened versus how many we've closed in our issue tracker at issues.imfreedom.org. So as you can see, we closed 23 this quarter. We only opened 14, so that's a net win for us, but we're still chewing through a backlog from Q3 where we had 52 opened and only 27 closed. I'm not sure what the 52 open was. I think part of that was I started putting more issues into the issue tracker for things I was doing for work on the code base, which I just put a whole bunch of them in. So the number's gonna be real high next quarter too. But yeah, it's just one of the things we're trying to reflect here is we're getting a lot of work done, even though we only have a small number of contributors, right? And that's, I'm gonna say it. It's kind of braggy, but that's impressive, right? Yeah. Wait, if we back up for a second, right? So if you look, 283 pull requests over 3 months, right? So divide that by 3. That's 40 something pull requests a month between 4 people. That's 10 a person a month. That's 1 every 3 days, counting weekends, right? That's not bad. That's pretty good. All right, anyways, next up are commits. I realized late last night that I forgot to put libg and t in here, but I didn't get a chance to correct it. So we'll be fixing that for the next State of the Bird. But this is just a number of commits per repository. You can see very clearly where all our attention has been, which is the Pidgin 3 branch, right? So commits are, generally speaking, they should equate to the number of review requests, but Review Board does support multiple commits per review request. So these numbers aren't always one-to-one. That's another reason, but this gives us a better idea of a breakdown of where all the work is going, right? So like even last quarter, as we were merging the GTK4 branch, we had 233 commits on Pidgin, but this quarter we had 212, right? So we were only short 21 commits versus all that momentum and everything. So that's pretty cool, pretty important. You also notice we had some development on Pidgin 2 this quarter. It's because we did do a release. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then, you know, a little bit of GPlugin, a little bit of Talkatu. So yeah. All right, next up, our infrastructure. So I finally got Discourse up and running, and you can go and find it on discourse.imfreedom.org. We are using our single sign-on service, which is JetBrains Hub, which we have running at hub.imfreedom.org. So if you go and try to log into our Discourse, you'll get redirected to Hub, which will ask you to log in with either Bitbucket, GitHub, or GitLab. At some point, I need to do the stuff to figure out how to get Google and Facebook off in there, but that's a problem for another day. It's been on my list forever, and it hasn't been an issue so far because we're mostly developers and, you know, tech-oriented people who have GitHub accounts and stuff like that that are able to log in. But yeah. So next up, Mailman is being shut down on January 20th. For those astute listeners, you'll notice that that is tomorrow at the time of this recording. I don't have a timeline for this, but basically what we're going to do is we are going to take the Mailman routing rules out of postfix and replace it with a rule that responds saying this mailing list is shut down. Please go to discourse.im.freedom to discuss. And this is how we're getting the email shut down. We also created new homes for the mailing list archives for list.pidgin.im and list.imfreedom.org. Currently, they are running on listtemp.pidgin.im and imfreedom.org in Kubernetes. They're not up to date. It was mostly just me building all the infrastructure and making sure everything works and going like that. But after we remove the routing rule tomorrow for Mailman, I will update those archives and redeploy them on Kubernetes, and that will be where the archives are going to live forever. We're obviously going to have to switch DNS and stuff like that too, but that's not a big deal. One of the reasons we decided to go this route with the email archive is over the 16 years we've had these specific mailing lists, there have been a lot of links out on the internet for them. So rather than breaking all of those links, it just makes sense to put them up here and keep them that way. And then this way we don't have to bring everything into Discourse either, which lets us kind of start kind of clean over there. So yeah. So next up we had a droplet on DigitalOcean, which is what they call a virtual machine for the new email. We tore that down because we're not going to be hosting our own email at all anymore. And that is because while our email service is still running at Wiktel, which is where Richard Lager, one of the Pidgin developers, works, we're going to be shutting that VM down. We're going to be shutting that VM down very soon. But Wiktel has been gracious enough to offer to host our email. So we will be tied in as just normal accounts on their system. Basically, the Pidgin.im email addresses, which we're trying to deprecate anyways, we're just going to make those forward to other people's email addresses. And then when we get to this part too, the incoming rules for like Mailman and stuff like that, those replies and stuff, that'll get worked into there too. But then they're also going to do mail relay for us. So for stuff like Review Board and Discourse and Hub and our other services that need to send out email, we will be sending our email through them, and then we don't have to host our own email, which is very cool. Okay, next up, Pidgin 2. We released Pidgin 2.14.11 on December 31st. We added Marcus Ivanhoe Fisher as a crazy patch writer. Congratulations to him. He is our first crazy patch writer in a very long time. I don't even know the last time we added a crazy patch writer. And I've been running the project since 2016, and he's the first one since then, at least. So it's been a long time, but it's really good to see new contributors coming in, working on stuff, getting stuff done. So that's very cool. So when you see Ivanhoe, go ahead and give him a congrats, something. Yeah. If you have questions, please type !ask and then your question so that I can answer it at the end of the presentation. Also in 2.14.11, we fixed a crash when closing the group chat with the spell check plugin loaded. This one kind of crept up on us. It seems like something changed in glib for this to happen, but I think it was also happening on Windows, and we didn't change the glib version there. So I'm not sure what happened, but Ivanhoe found the bug, fixed it, and we're good to go. Next up, we fixed the network interface detection on Windows. This was something like a 14-year-old bug or something. I don't remember, or was it 17 years? I don't remember. It's as long as this code has been there. So in Pidgin 2 has this weird Rube Goldberg machine to abstract the Windows socket API and make it look like a BSD socket API. And there was a bug in that code that basically caused an invalid read that made us try random IP addresses when they didn't exist. So this actually got brought up by a user who was running an XMPP server on their local LAN, and they were trying to do direct file transfers to machines on the network without the internet. And just it kept failing, and we were seeing these weird addresses. And as I dug into it, I figured out what was going on, and then we went and fixed that finally. So it's good to get that done out of the way. And yeah. Next up, we updated the About box to point people to Discourse instead of the mailing list. Again, part of the email shutdown. We need to get rid of it. So there you go. Then we also released 2.14.12 on December 31st. And the reason we had that on the same day was I tried to cut some corners when doing the Windows build because the Windows build takes really long. So I had started the Windows build and then updated the translations and then tagged the repository and built the source tarball. And then found out that didn't work because because the Romanian translations, there's something about one of the strings in there. It doesn't work with icon V, right? So as we try to translate it for the NSys installer, it breaks, and I don't know Romanian, so I can't actually fix it. So my solution is I delete the translated line and rebuild. Unfortunately, I didn't catch this until after I had already tagged and pushed all the code. So we had to spike the 2.14.11 release and then immediately release 2.14.12. So if you happen to be going through our old versions and you don't see any Windows binaries for 2.14.11, that's why. Because just, you know, sometimes you try to take shortcuts and you get messed up and stuff sucks, right? So that's what happens. All right, next up, other stuff for Pidgin 2. For better or worse, I've basically given up on the OAuth helper plugin. The OAuth helper plugin was a way to embed a browser inside of Pidgin 2, not really, but kind of. And then allow protocol plugins and other stuff to track when pages change and read cookies out of it and stuff like that. It worked as a proof of concept that it was possible, but making it work with the old glib and GTK and everything was just not worth it. I ran into tons of problems and stuff, and just going through and fixing it, it's time that's better spent working on Pidgin 3. Conceptually, it works. So what we'll do is we'll just build it similarly for Pidgin 3, and we'll have updated stuff that we can go with from there. We're very purposely trying to not actually include a rendering engine in Pidgin 3. And that's mostly because of security issues. Browsers are notoriously bad security wise, right? You see CVEs all the time. WebKit's been used numerous times to exploit multiple video game consoles and stuff like that, right? So it's something we don't want to have to worry about, so we just don't want it, right? So the way this works, we were using a library called WebView that basically on your platform will pick the native web view and then embed it directly. So on Linux, that uses WebKit GTK. On Mac, it uses WebKit, and on Windows, I don't know what the old one is called, but I think they also started adding Edge View support now. So basically, just the way this worked was we created an executable that linked to that library that ran out of process, and then we used a simple standard input, standard output as IPC between the two, just to start the program and then tell us when pages change, stuff like that. One of the reasons we want to do it that way is like WebKit GTK2 just recently got GTK4 support, and we're a GTK4 application. So until now that they have that, okay, we wouldn't really need it, but also we don't have to pull in the entire web rendering engine and everything for the main program, which is fine too, right? We'll just let that run as a separate executable that we fire off when we need it, and we'll be good. All right, next up, I attempted to fix the Google OSS fuzz stuff, but turns out it's a ginormous pain in the butt to make it work right. It's not necessarily Google OSS's fault or OSS Fuzz's fault. It's more a matter of trying to build static executables in Auto Tools is a nightmare. And I just kind of gave up on it. That's what it comes down to. Also, I mean, not much has changed in Pidgin 2 over the past 7 years, maybe more even. So, you know, any stuff that we did find with fuzzing we fixed, it's the likelihood of finding something else new is going to be not likely. So it is what it is. In the meantime, we're going to, so we're just kind of leaving it as it is. It's failing to build right now, and I get an email about it every day. So I need to figure out how to deal with that part of it at least. But a bunch of the stuff I was trying to do about like building the fuzzers in tree and stuff like that we're just throwing out. But the other stuff, like I said, the worst case is I get an email every day about it, so I'm not super worried about fixing it. But always we'll focus on it for Pidgin 3 when we get closer to a release. All right, Pidgin 3 is pretty much has become the norm. This is split into 2 slides, one for maintainability and one for new features and modernization. So we removed more unused signals. So we are slowly moving everything to GObjects, or I shouldn't say slowly, we're almost done, but we're still a lot of old legacy stuff we have to get rid of. Whatever, you know what I mean. So the unused signals here are what we call purple based signals. These are our own internal signaling system. If you don't know what I mean by signals, if you've ever used the observer design pattern, it's the same thing. And the thing is, as we're moving everything to GObjects and stuff, we're just cleaning up all the signals, and as we transition stuff to new API stuff like that, we end up having unused purple signals, and then, you know, once we find enough of them, we just go ahead and delete them. So yeah, we're gonna see that one for a number of times yet too. So all right, aside from that, we cleaned up a bunch of stuff in XMPP, including removing some deprecated ZEPs. ZEPs are XMPP extension protocols. They're basically when you add a feature to XMPP, it gets a number, blah, 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 right? We also flattened the Mason build files and removed some unnecessary checks. Mason added this new feature that makes it very helpful if you have multiple subdirectories in your project. So typically, like, we would have a subdirectory that would depend on some dependency, and then it would build the executable, right? So what they used to do is say, if we have this dependency, then it would have all the stuff listing, you know, build this plugin, do this, whatever, right? And all that was indented in an if, because that's where it needs to be. So Mason now has this new command. It's like subdir stop, or I don't remember, something like that. I have to look it up to get the exact name. So instead of if that, we can now say if not have that dependency, subdirectory stop, and then Mason will just stop processing that file, which means we can outdent everything. It's easier to read. It's not as nested, blah, 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 right? So we did that across all the code bases and went from there. And then there were some other cleanups from newer Mason versions, stuff like that as well. We also removed the universal plug and play API that was used for discovering your external IP address and opening ports. This was all for file transfers. We also removed the NatPMP port mapping code, which is also used for file transfers. The reason we're removing all this code is last Data Bird, we mentioned a project called Traversity that we started it. We haven't done a whole lot of work with it, but the idea is that all of this NAT traversal code and stuff like that is going to end up in Traversity. And the reason for that is writing this code sucks. It's really not fun. And as a client application, we want an abstraction, right? We don't care how the user's network is set up, whether it's UPnP or NatPMP or what. We don't care as the application. We just, the user doesn't care either. They're just like, hey, I want to send this file, right? So if they turn on NAT traversal stuff, we will then figure out which NAT traversal is available on their network, and then we will go and use it via Traversity, right? Like the Pidgin code right now and Pidgin 2 and everything doesn't do a good, it tries its best to do this, but like I think it prioritizes UPnP, something like that. Whereas the idea of Traversity is just going to do a discovery, figure out which one you have, and then go from there. And then if it detects like your IP address change or something like that, then it'll rediscover, right? That's the idea. We haven't actually coded it yet, but that's the idea. And then that way, you know, we don't avoid multiple lookups for UPnP when you don't have it because you're on a network that has NatPMP, right? It's a whole bunch of weird, complicated networking stuff nobody wants to deal with, but we have to because we support peer-to-peer file transfers, right? All right. Anyways, so we also removed the Novell, this Novell GroupWise, same time Silk and Zephyr protocol plugins. These have all pretty much been on the chopping block for a number of years, because we just don't have a way to test them. Novell and same time are proprietary protocols, and getting a server instance, I mean, you basically have to be an enterprise to even get them to talk to you, and they want thousands of dollars for it, and we don't have that, right? Silk, on the other hand, is open source, but the libraries for everything are basically unmaintained and haven't been touched in about a decade, I think. And even when we did have it compiling, I tried to connect to SilkNet and Pidgin would crash. And the crash wasn't in any of the Pidgin code or even the Silk protocol plugin. It was in the Silk client libraries. So it's just like, I guess we're going to let that one go. And then there's Zephyr. Zephyr is one of the earliest chat networks. It's basically part of MIT's Athena project. And as far as I know, it was really only used at MIT. I've tried to ask publicly numerous times for anybody that knows if MIT still uses Zephyr, and I couldn't find anything. And then I believe it was QLogic, but maybe not. Somebody found that the documentation for using Zephyr on MIT, or for using chat on MIT, removed Zephyr from their list, right? Like it used to be like, at first it was Zephyr, like we were going through the Wayback Machine, and it was like Zephyr, and then it was Zephyr and XMPP, and now it's just XMPP. So it's like, okay, if MIT's not using it, we're going to get rid of it, kind of thing. That code was also really old. It had pre-ANSI C code in it. We did a lot of that cleanup, stuff like that, but again, we can't test it because we don't have the network set up to do it. So it was just sitting there bit rotting. So we finally just pulled the plug and deleted it. All right, we removed GTK connection.ch, though that was the UI code for handling account reconnections and I think some connection errors and some other stuff. Basically, we're changing the way connections work in a lot of fun ways, but we're also, the bigger thing is we're making libpurple handle reconnections instead of the UI, because that doesn't necessarily make sense. And one of the things GTKCon was doing was it was monitoring for network changes and then determining when you were online and had internet access and then connecting all your accounts. There's a reason why that's bad that I'll get to on the next slide, but just keep that in mind, that that's not always, like, you don't necessarily want to connect when you only have internet access. Like I said, we'll explain more on the next slide. Aside from that, we completely removed account registration. The only protocol plugin I can find that has in-band registration is XMPP. And while it is a nice feature to be able to register from the XMPP client, the way it was implemented wasn't conducive to the way we're trying to move things. So while we're not opposed to bringing back account registration in some way, shape, or form in the future, right now it's just getting in our way, so we got rid of it. We also removed the Pidgin dialog API. This was just some helper API. So before Pidgin 3, all of our UI was built procedurally via C code, which meant there was lots of times where you'd have to write duplicate code, stuff like that. So, you know, following dry principle, you'd write a function to create a basic dialog, right? And then that way you'd have the same properties everywhere, so on and so forth. Now with everything in UI files, that code was just obsolete. We didn't use it anymore, so we deleted it. And then the possibly controversial one, we deleted the privacy API. Now this is controversial because we need a privacy API, but the one we had was not the one we want. This privacy API's origins dated all the way back to AIM, where you would have a permit and a deny list. And you could decide if you were going to only permit people on this list or only deny people on your deny list, right? We're taking a much simpler approach going forward. Right now we have so we'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, but we have a new, we're going to be representing any contact as a purple contact info. This stores a lot of info for us, which we can touch base on a little bit. I think we talked about this a little bit last State of the Bird, but basically most modern chat networks now, you don't just have a username when you send a message, right? That username is typically a display name. Well, the username is typically how that user logs in, but all the network communication between the clients uses a user ID, and then the clients on each side also grab a display name from the server on how to display that user, right? So we got three pieces of data we need for everything that's all tied back to a user ID. And this is where the idea of purple contact info comes from. And the purple contact manager is the contact manager keeps a collection of every single contact. Because historically what protocol plugin developers have had to do for Pidgin 2 is, sorry, I didn't move the mouse recently, so the screensaver clicked in. So what protocol plugin developers would have to do for Pidgin 2 was they would have to add people to your buddy list, or they would have to maintain their own internal index of the user ID to the display name and stuff like that, because otherwise they would constantly have to hit the remote service, and then they'd get rate limited and blah, 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 right? So by just building that in as part of the infrastructure of Purple 3, that problem's just resolved, right? Everybody's got one place to store all of it, and it's in one nice normalized place. All right, next up. Pidgin 3 modernization. We added some API for handling SQLite migrations. We have multiple things where we are internally going to be storing them as a SQLite database. This includes the aforementioned contact manager. Like I said, since we are going to be storing data about every single contact you see, right? So right now that is however many people are in this Twitch chat plus whatever, right? We're going to save their basic info to disk because we need that cached, right? We don't want to keep hitting the external servers multiple times to get display names and whatever. So that's how that's going to handle that. We're also going to be using this for, oh, what was the other thing? Well, we also use SQLite for the default history adapter, or history logger, whatever you want to call it. That uses SQLite by default. And I thought we had another thing we are going to put in SQLite, but I can't remember what it was right now. I'll figure it out later. Aside from that, we added support for protocol plugins to subclass Purple Connection. Historically, the way a protocol would associate data with connection was we had this silly method that just used a void star pointer that was called Purple Connection set protocol data and Purple Connection get protocol data. This ended up in a lot of useless calls to those two functions. Well, actually mostly the getter than the setter, but yeah. So by subclassing this, that's just eliminates a lot of those issues, because now when you get the connection, you can just typecast it, or you can just call it to whatever you need to, and it's there. You don't have to worry about that. And yeah. Next up, we added support for plugins to for protocol plugins to validate account parameters and test if a connection is possible. So as I mentioned on the last slide with the GTK connection stuff, our plan, although we don't have this fully implemented right now, is libpurple will monitor for network changes. And then when that happens, if a account is not connected, it will ask the protocol if it can connect the account. One of the things we can do is the network monitoring stuff we're using is called G Network Monitor. It's built into glib. It's part of GIO. And one of the things you can do is you can create I forget what they call it. It's like a socket connection, and ask if it can connect to it. So basically what this will do is, so the assumption we made in Pidgin 2 and earlier was that all of your network protocols or all of your accounts need to have an internet connection to be connected, which isn't even true for the protocols in Pidgin 2, right? So the Bonjour protocol just works on your local LAN, and that would work just fine without an internet connection, but the way Pidgin 2 is developed, that doesn't work. So by doing it this way instead, the protocol plugin now has a can connect async function. It's just asynchronous. That's why it has async on the end. Which it'll basically attempt, or it doesn't have to attempt a connection, but it can validate all the credentials at that point. It can then also use the network monitor. The network monitor, or the G network monitor, has a method like G network monitor can access or something. I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head. But basically you pass it in a network address and it'll look based on what interfaces are available on the machine if you can actually route to that address. And if you can, then it returns true, right? So also, like in the case earlier I mentioned with the user that was trying to send a file between peers on an XMPP connection on a local LAN, the can connect thing will detect that, right? Because it'll see that the XMPP server is on the same LAN segment, and then it'll just be like, yep, we can connect, it's fine, right? And it doesn't care if you don't have an internet connection because it doesn't need it, right? So instead of having libpurple try to make a proper judgment call, we leave it up to the protocol, and we're making sure that the protocol has the tools to be able to make an informed decision is what it comes down to. So there'll probably be a little bit of redundant code there across the protocols, but it's not much, so it's not a big deal. All right, next up, we implemented connecting capabilities and sending direct messages to the IRC-v3 protocol plugin. The IRC-v3 protocol plugin is a from-scratch implementation of the IRC-v3 protocol. We decided to go this route because the existing IRC plugin, while highly functional and does its job, it's trying to put in the IRC v3 features to it, as well as all the new API we're building in Purple 3, is just an exercise in futility, really. This gets to the whole cost of, rehab versus start over kind of thing. And for this protocol plugin, we decided to start over. So, all right, next up, we moved from libsoup 2 to libsoup 3. As you can guess, libsoup 2 is getting deprecated and libsoup 3 is a new one. Libsoup is an HTTP library that's based on glib and gobject, and libsoup 3 now uses GIO for everything. So getting that migration done and out of the way right away is very nice, because now we don't have to worry about supporting the old one, so we're in good shape there. We also modernized some dialogues for adding buddies and chats. Those are in the buddy list. Modernization, I believe, was not necessarily moving to UI files, but like formatting them, cleaning them up, and making them use newer widgets, that kind of stuff. Next up, we split most of Purple Contact into Purple Contact Info. And then Purple Contact now subclasses Purple Contact Info, and we also made Purple Account subclass Purple Contact Info as well. So this is really confusing, but so our purple contact before this, as I mentioned earlier, it would hold all of your information about user ID, username, local alias, display name, etc., 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 right? A purple contact had all of that, but it also tied it to an account. This became problematic because one of the things we want to do is we wanted to make a purple account be a contact info, because a purple account has all of those same properties. And more importantly than that, when we're talking about sending messages, we want to send a message to and from a contact info, and we couldn't do that with an account. So we took the account out of the contact info, out of the contact, renamed it to purple contact info, created purple contact info that was a subclass of purple contact info, put the account back into it, and then made purple account subclass purple contact info. It's really confusing, shuffle game, whatever. It's fine. It's good now. And basically it just gives us a simple API to basically anybody who is a contactable person, right? Whether it's your account or somebody else on any IM network or any chat network, right? All right, next up, we created purple avatar to replace purple buddy icon. Historically, purple buddy icon had to do things in interesting ways because we didn't allow any sort of image manipulation or anything like that in libpurple, because those were UI things at the time. We've changed our stance on that. Originally, we made libpurple depend on the GDK pixbuff library, which will allow anybody that can use libpurple to scale images and resize them or crop them or whatever. Which is one of the reasons why purple buddy icon existed the way it did, because it had this thing called the purple buddy icon spec, which would let a protocol define to a user interface how it should scale an image to be sent out as an avatar over that network. But now that we have GDK pixbuff in libpurple, the protocol can just take like a high res one and then adjust it and do what it needs to. But we needed some additional data with that, so that we can build a cache of them and everything. And that's the other thing that's going to use SQLite. So we haven't started it yet, but the purple avatar manager will keep a cache of all of the avatars on disk so that we don't have to keep downloading them from the external IM networks and stuff like that. And then it'll, make sure they're up to date and stuff like that. And then it'll have a mapping between every contact info and the file name on disk, and that's what the SQLite database will be used for, so that we can keep track of those and then, delete ones for accounts that got deleted or stuff that hasn't been seen in, I don't know, 90 days or something, right? We'll just expire it. But yeah, we haven't finished designing that yet, and I'm realizing I forgot to enter a ticket for that one, but that's the plan there. And then lastly, we added a color property to purple contact info. Now, what this means is, so there's a few protocols where this comes in use, right? So you probably haven't noticed this before, or maybe you have. But say, for example, if you're on a Twitch directory page and you're looking at a bunch of different streams that are online, if you like hover over them, you'll see the image, you'll see the picture kind of like shift over, and you'll get a color around the edge as it like pulls it up and displays the shadow. That color is what this is for. It's also there for Discord contacts, because depending on your Discord roles or whatever, you could have a different color for your account and stuff like that. So that's what that property is there for. Obviously, we did a lot more than just these 2 pages worth of things. These were just some of the high points that we wanted to touch base on. Obviously, there's a lot more in those 212 commits or whatever we had than just this stuff, but this is, the high level stuff we wanted to cover that we thought was interesting to everyone. All right, next up, GPlugin. So GPlugin is our plugin library. GPlugin was started by me back in I don't even remember. It was at least 2012. And I created it because I was working on Guifications 3 at the time, and I had all these different parts of the system that were different applications, and I wanted multiples of them to have plugins. So I needed a plugin library for it because I didn't want to build plugins again and again and again. I looked at the alternatives that were out there. None of them really gelled with me. So I wrote my own. So that's the quick short story of GPlugin. But so we released GPlugin 0.39.0 on October 27th. In that release, we removed GTK 3 support. Right now, the only consumer of GPlugin is Pidgin 3 and Purple 3, and Pidgin 3 doesn't use GTK 3, so we don't need it. So we got rid of it. We also removed the Perl 5 loader. We spent a lot of time, so much time making the Perl 5 loader work, and then we can't build it. We don't have the dependencies to build it on Mac. We don't have the dependencies to build it on Windows. We don't have the dependencies to build it on all the BSDs, I don't think. So it became a solution to a problem nobody has, is really what it came down to, or could even have, because they didn't have the dependencies. So we ultimately just decided to delete it. If somebody wants to bring it back at some point, it's still in version control. We can still go grab it, right? But there's no sense in promoting a language for plugin loading when only a very small subset of the community can use it, right? Similarly, we removed the TCC loader. The TCC loader was the tiny C compiler loader. The gimmick of TCC is that you can compile source files to memory and then execute them directly. So what the TCC loader did is it would, as it was probing and finding plugins, it would look for .c files, and if it found them, it would try to compile them. And if it compiled them and could query them because they had the GPlugin symbols in it, then it would load them and they'd work as normal plugins. The problem is TCC doesn't really have a maintainer at the moment, and on top of that, its build isn't exactly the same in all the distros. Some of them it's a static file only. Other ones you have a dynamic loader, or you have a shared object, stuff like that. It just got real messy, right? On top of that, there's no good way for the C file to tell you what it needs for library, or for C flags and library flags. So like we would have to pass in, or the loader couldn't know that you needed GTK unless we were going to write something that would parse the file before it went through the TCC tokenizer to be compiled and everything. And that was just an amount of work we weren't willing to do. So we sat and watched to see if anybody's going to do anything with that for a while, and nobody did. So at that point we deleted it because it's not going to do anybody good. It was disabled by default forever, and yeah. Next up, we had a support for Python 3.11. This sounds fancy. It's not. Python, every minor version of Python adds its own package config file. So when you want to support a newer version, you have to check for the existence of that package config file. So that's what we did. It sounds bigger than it is, but I mean, it's not a lie. Aside from that, we took the first steps for creating the static loader by creating GPlugin source. The static loader idea is to allow you to statically compile plugins into your binary. Most people don't know this, but Pidgin 2 and earlier, you can basically treat it as like a white box chat client by statically compiling in just the protocol plugin or plugins you want, and then totally disabling plugin support, right? So in the past, there have been companies, I think it was like Support Desk or something like that, where they would build with like just XMPP and that was it, right? And then they would disable plugins and stuff like that, and then their employees could only use that to reach their internal network and stuff like that, right? Now, we're not really trying to go out of our ways to make this still possible, but the static loader is something that'll make parts of that possible. The static loader will also make the unit test for GPlugin a million times easier. So to do this, basically what we had to do is we created a new class called GPlugin source, which is a way to go and find plugins. So we implemented GPlugin file source, which will go and look at the file system, which is what we already had. So we just created this extra extension point here. So basically the GPlugin manager will now iterate GPlugin sources and keep querying them until it's got no new plugins and no new failed plugins. So that we can now go and implement the static source, but we haven't gotten to that part yet because not a high priority. Just kind of one of those things where it's like, man, it'd be really nice to have this because the unit tests are way out of control. All right, next up, we made the GPlugin manager type public. So originally, we were trying to kind of protect what the GPlugin manager type was, and you weren't supposed to access it directly or anything like that. But that led to a lot of problems with type safety and geometric introspection and stuff. So we just made it public, and that solved all those issues. Next up, we released GPlugin 0.39.1 on November 23rd. This moved to the new Python initialization method. Initializing libpython, this is a newer version to do it, but the version we were using goes back to like Python 2. And this newer version has in every version of Python 3 that we currently support, which I think is 3.6 and on. So this is one of those things where like, all right, update it now so that we don't have to go, so that we're not forced to update it later kind of things, right? So no big change, just it was slightly different or different function name, minor tweaks to parameters, you know the drill, nothing major. Like Pidgin, we also modernized and simplified the Meson build files, and then we fixed some additional deprecation warnings. Next up, Talkatu. We didn't have any releases with Talkatu, but there's some maintenance in the code base that will result in a release in the near future. Talkatu, for you listeners that don't know, is a library for our chat widgets. We ran into an issue years ago now where we got into a problem because our conversation widgets were using WebKit 1, and WebKit 1 was being deprecated and removed from the Linux distributions. Unfortunately, we couldn't go to WebKit 2 because, number one, the API was completely different, which would require basically a rewrite anyways. But there's also no Windows port of WebKit 2. So that was basically a non-starter for us. So Talkatu started as a re-implementation of GTK IM HTML from Pidgin 2, but following the abstractions that GTK set better. And it's grown to have some additional widgets, stuff like that now. There's discussion where we're probably going to end up merging Talkatu into the Pidgin 3 codebase, just because there's some rough edges around stuff, namely emojis, where we either need to add a core UI split to Talkatu or we just need to absorb Talkatu. Originally, we started Talkatu as a library because writing these widgets is not easy. They're difficult, they're complex, they're easy to mess up, stuff like that, right? So the idea was if we had a library that other chat clients could use, then we could go ahead and, you know, we could work together with those other chat clients and go from there. Unfortunately, I didn't really bring it up to anybody, but they're all doing their own thing, so I don't see why they would want to use ours. But the other projects that are out there, the instant message clients that use GTK, there's not really interest for it. So all we were really doing right now is creating more trouble for ourselves by having it as a separate library. So we still haven't made the final decision, but it's probably what's going to happen before too long. All right, libgnt. Libgnt is the glib end curses toolkit that was built for Finch. It's basically a GTK-like API for end curses. Similar to Talkatu, no releases. There's been some minor code cleanup in it, that kind of stuff. So yeah. All right, Traversity, still a work in progress. It's not used by libpurple at all yet, so that's why you don't see a whole lot of it talk about here. I did fix the local IP discovery stuff on Windows to also support IPv6, but that's basically it. That's all that's happened there. And as far as setbacks go, surprisingly, we haven't had any of this quarter. No setbacks at all, which is quite surprising. All right. Next up, the demo. So I kind of dry ran this beforehand, and I'm going to warn you. So the first thing is the demo is going to demo the current state of the code base. It has been 19 days since all of the metrics and everything from the state of the bird. A lot has happened in that 19 days. We're going to cover some of that here in the demo, just because you're going to see it and it's going to make sense. Unfortunately, there's one major bug that I know how to work around, but we haven't fixed yet. And then there's another basically graphical bug we need to fix that this code was merged on Monday and we just didn't get a chance to fix it yet. So I already compiled. We're gonna go ahead and run Pidgin 3. So I realized too, I should probably demo this in like GNOME or something so it looks a little bit better rather than having the i3 window decorations, but that's okay. But so we still have the old contact list. This window is going away. You'll see what's going to replace it here shortly. But this is the main conversation window. This is the main window that you will see in Pidgin 3 going forward. The accounts window might get merged into this at some point. We haven't decided that yet. We'll see. But, you know, so accounts here, you have no accounts. This is all brand new. This all just got merged on Monday. We're going to go ahead and say add new. One of the things we added is a demo protocol plugin. What the demo protocol plugin does is it lets us demo stuff. Go figure, right? So this is no network connection, whatever. It's just fake static data that lets us like go ahead and send a message to the Echo bot. Hello, state of the bird. That will just respond back with our message, right? Easy peasy. We haven't put a whole lot of styling into the conversation window yet, especially the actual messages and stuff. At some point we'll get there. We're just not there yet. But so this is the new account window. This is the graphical error. This should be aligned up towards the top, not center. It just got overlooked. When this was being developed and all the reviews, it was filled up so we could see all of the different errors and stuff like that in it. And that's why we didn't notice that it was aligned center or vertically aligned center, right? We just got to set it to top. We'll be fine. Next up is the new contact list. This is the bug that I mentioned. As you can see, that is wrong. However, I found the easy fix right now is once the account exists, it's fine. So the new contact list doesn't do a whole lot of anything right now. It can open new conversations, but that's about it, right? So let's put this back here. Right, so hello, state of the bird, and the Echo bot will, or it says I'm not on. Why am I not online? Okay, that's another bug to figure out, right? But so yeah, so the new conversation window or new contact window, this is gonna get built up. We're gonna add searching, filtering, all that kind of stuff to it, and then that's gonna replace this. The status icons are probably gonna get moved as emblems. We did that way back in the day, put the emblem on top of the buddy icon. Then we did this to put more focus on that. Now the common consensus in chat clients is to put the emblem back on the thing, so we're probably going to go that route. But yeah, so we're getting there slowly but surely. So one of the other things we haven't really talked about a whole lot is the notifications. Notifications are very cool. So historically, when you would get account disconnection, like this guy here, so it's printing connection 3, 2, 1, link. In Pidgin 2, you would get a dialog at the bottom of the contact list window, right? So here's your contact list. Oop. You'd get a notification saying account demo has disconnected, blah, 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 right? Now you've got the notification window where it shows you everything right here, right? And you can just immediately hit reconnect and you'll reconnect and you're good to go, right? Now, one of the other fun things about the notification window is we can, this is why we have the demo protocol plugin. See, I can just make all this stuff magically happen. So when you get a contact authorization request and somebody wants to add you to their contact list, right? That'll show up in the notification window. You can add them, you can message them. See, yep, now we're messaging Bob. What's up, Bob? Right? And everything's good to go. You can also just dismiss them directly, go from there, that's fine. One of the other fun things is if your account gets disconnected, all of these are, their actions are only important while you're actually connected to the account. So if you get disconnected, actually, we could have done temporary, but we're going to do the full disconnect. They disappear. You can't act on them, so there's no point in showing you them anymore, right? Because in theory, you're going to see them on another device or they're no longer valid, right? We plan on putting file transfers and other stuff like that in here, or like wall ops or administrative messages on XMPP. The idea is that all of those will end up here in the notification window, and you'll be able to go from there. So you'll have one place to find all that, right? And when we get mention support and stuff like that too, that'll all end up in here as well. So we have a history of all your mentions, and you can go and dismiss them and blah, 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 right? Some of the other fun stuff to talk about is in the preferences. Again, everything looks weird on my machine because it's tile and window manager. Sorry, like I said, I should start demoing this under GNOME. It's my fault. I'll do it next time. You'll notice there is a significantly less amount of preferences. Most of the network stuff will probably be similar, but this is gonna get pruned out a lot. Proxy stuff's all the same. Status and idle, pretty much the same. Credentials, for those of you that haven't been here in a while. We don't store passwords ourselves anymore. By default, we do not store any passwords. If you want to store a password, you need to use libsecret or kwallet. Or if you're on Windows, you can use the WinCred API. Or on Mac, you can use keychain access. We integrate with those. And stuff will just work. Voice and video preferences are pretty much the same. We have an idea of how we're going to redesign the voice and video API, but we haven't built it yet. Aside from that, the About box just got a big overhaul. But it looks pretty fancy, if I do say so myself, although QLogic's the one that rebuilt all of it. So there's all the developer info in here, just like it was before. Just now it's in the modern list style stuff, right? All the translators are here, blah, blah, blah. But the real one that's going to save everybody a lot of time is the build information one. Now, the build information has, all the stuff you want to know about it. But the really cool part about this is if you hit this copy all button, and we go into, let's just say, by build info, and we paste that in. Now when we ask a user, we don't have to ask a user what version of something they have anymore, or what plugins they have loaded. Actually, we don't have the plugins loaded in here. We should do that. We can just tell them to go to the help window, hit build information, and hit copy all. Paste that into a no paste, and now instead of that annoying back and forth a bunch of times, we just get all the info at once, right? And that is super cool because we have all the Mason arguments. This is all the stuff that's passed into Mason during your build. So we can see if you turn on any weird C flags or anything like that. It makes troubleshooting so much easier. It's ridiculous. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and then QLogic finally did it, and it's just like, oh, thank you. It was on my list, I just hadn't gotten to it. So aside from that, there's not a whole lot more here. Remember, the contact list window's going away soon. So we'll be down to a single window application. We are still planning to allow you to drag and drop these out, but this widget here is a temporary one. This is going to get replaced. We just haven't finished it yet. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. Oh, I can show you the plugin dialog too. Or I can't. Okay. New bug. We'll have to figure that one out later. But that's why they call them dangerous demos, right? So, yeah. All right. So, what are our next steps? So, between now and the next day of the bird, we're going to finish adding new functionality to the new contact list and debugging it, obviously. We're going to finish migrating everything to the new contact API. Like I said, that's going to be necessary for a lot of stuff, so it needs to be there. We're going to completely remove the old buddy list API. It's all going to be gone. Purple B list, purple buddy list, purple group, purple meta contact, purple chat. Well, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to handle that, but that's another story. We're going to rewrite the status API. I've got a big proposal for that right now that we're probably going to start on next week. Then we're going to finish integrating the history API into the conversation window. That way you no longer have the logging API or anything, and we don't have to dump stuff in. Like as you're viewing and searching through logs, it'll happen in the conversation window. That's what the history API is for. And then maybe Alpha 1. So I don't think Alpha 1 is going to be done by the time of the next State of the Bird, but we now have a roadmap, quote unquote. This is a list of the tickets that I think we need at a bare minimum to get into Alpha 1. You'll notice there are a lot of size large and size extra large. These may be bigger, they may be smaller, I don't know. I'm sure there's stuff we're missing, and yeah. But people keep asking for a roadmap and a timeline. I can't give you a timeline, but I can show you how much we need to get done before we get to Alpha 1. And that's all of this right here. Currently, it's only 24 issues. But like I said, the Avatar Manager API is missing on here. So we need to deal with that as well. I need to get that entered, stuff like that. But that link, you can go ahead and investigate and look at your own time. And yeah. So next up is on a more personal note. For those who don't know, I have spent the better part of the past 3 years working on Pidgin full-time, more or less full-time. I've been doing some contract work here and there to pay the bills. Unfortunately, contract work has basically dried up, and I'm going to be stuck having to get a full-time job. There's pluses and minuses to that. I could really use the health insurance because I'm getting older and my body doesn't work the way it used to, right? And it'll be nice to not have to be so frugal about everything. I've definitely over these past 3 years found a way to stretch a dollar. But it's just, I don't know how much longer I can sustain this is what it comes down to. And what that means is that the amount of time I'm spending on Pidgin 3 is going to go down, right? So we just saw all those nice fancy metric graphs and we saw how high the velocity is. That number is going to go down. Right. So of those numbers, I'm typically at least 2/3 of those numbers. So of those 230 pull requests, we'll just say it's 240 because that's easy, right? I'm 160 of them, right? When I'm working full time, I'm not going to be able to do that, right? It's just not going to happen. So this is another thing where having the roadmap is good, but it's another, I'm not going to be able to give you any idea of a timeline. So unless I magically find a grant or a contract that doesn't require a lot of time, that's just the way things are going to go. Streams are going to be missed. In fact, I'm skipping next week's Thursday's Pidgin night because I am going to a recruiting event because I need to, right? I got to pay my bills. So that is what it is. That is the way it is. So, yeah. All right. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into some questions. So far, we only have one question, and that's fine. But please, if anybody has any others, please don't hesitate. Please be sure to ask them. I need to go to here. Then I need to go to here. I need to hit that. Okay. So our first question comes from, no, that's not showing up right. Why isn't that showing up right? That should be showing up right. This is the same thing. Okay, that should be fine now. If you have a question for me, please type exclamation point ask so I can answer it as this setup. So Linux Return asks, how can I help with the infrastructure? I'm not a coder, but I love Pidgin. It depends. So we don't necessarily want to give people we don't really know access to our infrastructure for what I hope are obvious reasons. But we do have repositories of all of our Kubernetes manifest minus the secrets, as well as all the Ansible we use for building everything else out. So if you're good with Ansible or Kubernetes, get in contact with me and we can go from there. That said, the infrastructure is more or less pretty much stable. The big thing right now is the email, but we're almost done with that. So yeah. So it depends on your skill set, that kind of stuff. But if you're interested, just hit me up on our contact page and we can go from there. So yeah. All right, we'll give you all a little bit more. I got one more snooze before the ads kick in. So yeah, if you have a question, now is the time. Otherwise, I guess we're just gonna get moving. All right, so, oh, that was supposed to be here. Whoops, wrong one. All right, so closing notes. Again, I'm trying not to harp on this too much, but Pidgin is a volunteer project. It is an open source project. Nobody makes any money for it. One of the reasons it's been alive, and I don't want to say brought back to life because we're not quite back to life yet, is because people decide to work on it. So if you have ever considered contributing, not sure where to get started or anything, be sure to check out our contributing guide. Did I get that right? Yes. Our contributing guide right over there. But also, if you would like to help us financially some way, there's a bunch of different options. You can find links to a bunch of different ways to do that over there on that link as well. One of them is Amazon Smile, which, as you may know, Amazon announced yesterday that they're going to be shutting down Amazon Smile. But I don't know, maybe if you use Smile, you can set it to our charity, which is Instant Messaging Freedom. And you know, we can get some passive income from you using Amazon, you know, whatever. There's a bunch of different options, bunch of different things there, that kind of stuff. There's one more thing I was just going to mention. Oh, speaking of Instant Messaging Freedom, what's it? Yeah. Instant Messaging Freedom is a nonprofit. It is an umbrella corporation for both Pidgin, Finch, and Adium, even though Adium's kind of, we'll say, dormant. Let's go with that right now. But yeah, so any support there goes to those projects, that kind of stuff. So if that is something you would like to consider supporting, by all means, feel free. All right, so we got one more question here real quick, making me jump between things. All right, oh wait, what? It didn't show up in my queue. There it is. All right, so the question is, you're interested in contributing, but work full-time in software, so can't give a lot of time. Is it worth giving you a few hours a month? It depends, right? The Pidgin code base is a lot better than it used to be, but it is a complicated beast that's hard to follow and understand. If you're familiar with glib and GTK, you'll have a much better time, especially in the newer code base. But if you're not, it's probably not going to be pleasant at first. But if it sounds like a challenge you want to get into, then by all means, feel free, right? So, but yeah, so check out the contributing guide there. Otherwise, join us on Discord or any of our other contact things. You can find more additional contact info on our webpage as well. So, yeah. All right, well, with that, till next time, April 20th for Q1. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks for coming by, and we will see you then. Goodbye.